Hi, welcome to another edition of What Matters Most. This is our third episode. Believe it or not, it's been 3 months. This is our third month on the air, bringing people together to speak about history and to talk about what matters most. As the show name says, it is about talking about what matters most in the community, because we are so divided. We have so many different people coming together and others fighting each other. Here in Londonderry, we've had episodes in high schools where people, in our high school, where people go to complain about wearing masks and others want to wear masks. It's just so confusing, but what really brings us together is why this show exists. My name is Louisa Piet, and welcome once again. And today we have a very special guest. I'm thrilled to have this guest. It is JerriAnne Boggis, and she is the executive director of the New Hampshire Heritage Trail, and she is here to talk about the project. And I'm going to ask her, of course, what matters most in her life and what she does. But JerriAnne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I've been almost stalking your website for weeks and months, and I just love the project. And I just had to bring you here because this is New Hampshire. This is a state that's known for being very, very, as we say, non-diverse. It is a state where some people think there are no African Americans here. I mean, I sometimes feel very lonely here. But then I saw the project and I said, but this is so beautiful. Thank you for heading such a wonderful project. And how would you like us to introduce you and the project?
So I think what you introduced is good. JerriAnne Boggis. I'm the executive director for the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. We're headquartered in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and we're developing a statewide physical trail from the seacoast all the way up to the White Mountains for the history that we have, Black history that we have documented in our state. We're not only a physical trail, but we're also an educational trail where we're working to raise awareness for New Hampshire's Black history through telling these stories, these local stories of African American history that's been around since the 1700s in our state. And doing educational programs to raise awareness, to celebrate Black history and Black culture in the state, and to create more inclusive communities. So often we look at New Hampshire as, it's always labeled as one of the whitest states in the Union.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I was saying.
Once you start looking at the history,
it's
New Hampshire has never been all white.
It's never been all white, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right about that. It is, what I like, that word inclusion is so important, because instead of antagonizing somebody who does not understand the history or who thinks that the African Americans or even Native Americans or Hispanics have no place in the state, we need to embrace our diversity. And so inclusion means not only allowing the diversity to flourish, but also to recognize that everybody has a place and a role to play in this community. That's why I love the project so much. I'm obsessed with it, and I did a virtual tour. I missed the tours because it's very cold now. You're not doing the tours, but can you talk a little bit about the people that started this project and what the project has achieved so far?
Okay. So the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire we're in our 4th year as a nonprofit organization. We are an outgrowth, an extension of what was the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail, which is 26 or 27 years old. And that was started by a woman called Valerie Cunningham in the Seacoast. Everybody knows Valerie. Thanks, Valerie, for doing this work.
Absolutely. Thanks, Valerie.
So she started the Black Heritage Trail. She was born and raised in Portsmouth. And as a young girl, she was always looking for herself in her community. Again, that label of being one of the whitest state in the Union just never sat really well with her. So she'd go to the library and she'd do research as a young kid, you know, looking for stories about people of color in New England, in her state, in her hometown. And from starting that work when she was young, from 12, to what developed into the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail some 60 years later, that gave her the passion to do that research. And in doing that, she created the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail, which has around 25 stops on the trail where we have markers that tells the story of some of our early African Americans, our enslaved population. It tells the story of enslavement. Most people don't think New Hampshire had anything to do with enslavement.
Right. I myself, you know, being a first-generation American, had to do some research into it, and I, for the longest while, said New Hampshire had no slaves. It's the first state. It's the freest state. Live free or die. There would be no slavery here, would it? But there was.
There
in
was.
The history.
We were a port. We had slave auctions in our taverns, on our docks, and places. So, yeah, that history is alive and well here in New Hampshire.
Absolutely, and I was able to watch your. The tour. I did the virtual tour. It's fabulous. Everybody should go on your website, which is
blackheritagetrailnh.org.
There you go. If you can get to that website, you can do a virtual tour if you're not able to visit in person. Of course, visiting in person will be very important, and I will do it myself. I haven't done it yet, but you should go to that website. It's just amazing. It is the best way to get America to be at its best, to do its best. And I am so glad that, you joined the team that started it, and the board, and started this project. Can you tell me about the programs that you run? Because it's so well organized. You have talks, you have symposiums. I mean, you have a number of events. And
in our efforts to raise awareness and celebrate Black life in New Hampshire, we have 5 major programs a year. And we start off in February to March, for 6 weeks, what we call the Tea Talks, the Eleanor William Hooker Tea Talks series. And that's a series of community dialogues where we bring people together. It really is more focused on New Hampshire. You know, all our programs are based in history. You know, we do historical work, but on contemporary issues. For example, the Tea Talks that will start in February 2022, the theme is Courageous Conversations. And what we're going to be doing, we're starting off the first talk looking at the bill that was passed, the Divisive Concept Bill, and what that means, what it means to our teachers, what it means to our talking about our history, just an exploration on that. And then the other talks, the other 5 talks, we'll bring people from different BIPOC community to have these in-depth conversation about what it means to be in that community living in New England. For example, the first panel will be Native Americans. We'll look at what are the issues. Then the next one will be Asian Americans or living here. The third one will be Latinos, Latinas, multi-ethnic groups, and of course African Americans. And then you also have some kind of podcast that I was listening to that I really got into. I was I guess it was it like a it's not a podcast, but it's like a recorded program. So all our programs, we record all our programs. We have a lot of panel discussions and talks. So we record them and then put them on our website or on our YouTube channel.
So that's what I was listening to.
So after the Tea Talks in June 19th, around there, we celebrate Juneteenth.
That's right.
You know, which was just passed as a national holiday.
That's right. The official date celebrating the end of slavery.
The end of.
And I think a lot of people here in London area, of course, there is very little, I think, understanding of the history. And Juneteenth is actually the day that people that were enslaved in the South realized that they had been free for a year.
For 2 years.
For 2 years.
It was 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that there was a additional fighting in Galveston, Texas, 2 years after, where the enslaved were. There was another additional fight for their freedom there, but that date, because the U.S. Army rode into Galveston to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. It's not the only date.
Right.
There were other pockets of enslavement across the country at that time, but because that was such a big one with the U.S. Army riding in, it became celebrated. It was the first Juneteenth celebration, and so now we officially celebrate that as the actual end of enslavement for African Americans at that time.
That's amazing. And do you have a program coming up for 2022?
So 2022, absolutely. We're always themed for the things we do. So the theme for Juneteenth 2022. I can't believe it's 2022.
I know, and then saying Juneteenth 2022.
It's like, when is that?
It went so fast.
Absolutely.
It just went so fast.
I think this COVID years has messed everybody up.
It has messed us up with dates. I have to admit, I sometimes say, which day is it today? And, which day of the month it is?
Yeah.
Is it? I mean,
absolutely. So the theme is we're going to look at the role that public art and public artists plays in communities. There's some public artwork going on in Nashua and in Manchester. There's a project working in Portsmouth, and they're more inclusive, murals, and not only just artists, but public performance art. Right. So we'll take a look at that and see how does that change the landscape that we're in when we bring the public artists into these spaces.
That's amazing. So I was looking also at the curriculum development part, because teaching the young is so very important. Yeah. I keep talking about it. In my previous show, we talked about it, about gardening, teaching kids to garden, and even having school projects where children learn to do gardening in their schools. But this one, to learn about our history, real history in our schools, isn't that so important?
Yeah, it's important for all of us. But for me, it's particularly important to our students of color, who need to have that sense of space, of belonging to a space, of that deep-rooted history, and not just the stereotypes of what our history is. But, New Hampshire has a lot of firsts. First in the nation, first in the world. The first person of color to be elected to public office was Wentworth Cheswell out of Newmarket.
Oh, wow.
The first black woman to publish a novel in the world was Harriet Wilson out of Milford, New Hampshire.
Oh, that's amazing.
The first celebrity of any form was a magician, Richard Potter out of Andover.
Wow.
So we're we talk about the first in politics, we're rich in our stories about African American history. And of course, there's the story of Ona Marie Judd, who was enslaved to the Washingtons. She escapes the Washingtons out of Philadelphia and ends up in Portsmouth. Oh. And then she dies in Greenland. So we have that rich story that's not only a New Hampshire story, but it's an American story, and it's an international story.
It's an international story. Yeah. It is, as I always say, it's mankind. We're just one, moving around in different spaces. I was saying to my previous guest, I like local. I said, but we belong to the planet. We think globally, but act locally. And what you're doing is so on point, acting locally to educate our people, to educate everybody that's in the state, to be not only inclusive, but to understand that we've all contributed to America today, to what America is today.
We're all human, having a human experience.
Exactly, and we all want the same things. We want a good education, we want a good health care, we want unity, we want a community that's a thriving community. and that's precisely why we're here today. And I am so thrilled to hear about this project. Can you talk a little bit about the the Heritage Trail started in a house that belonged to somebody. I think it was that I'm trying to figure out which figures. You mentioned quite a few already, but which ones would you think that we need to know about?
So I mentioned a few. In Portsmouth, we start our tours at the dock, right, where the ships would come in, and we'll talk, the story of enslavement.
Okay, yeah, that's why Portsmouth is important, because it has a harbor. It has a port.
It has a harbor, and it's I'm stuttering a little bit. We always start our stories with enslavement, but not realizing that the people who were brought here, they weren't slaves when they were born. They weren't slaves when the ship landed.
Exactly.
They were enslaved after they came here. So we made them that. They were, had rich culture, rich histories, rich, all this wealth from the countries that they were coming from. And then they were enslaved here. So we tell a little bit of that story at our docks. And, there's the story of Prince Whipple from the Moffat Ladd house. He was with Moffat Ladd, who was a signer on the Constitution. Ona Marie Judd, her connection to George Washington. So there are a couple houses. The Langdon House.
The Langdon House. That's the one I was thinking about.
We tell that story of Ona Judd.
That's the house I was thinking about, the Langdon House.
Yeah, because there's that series of letters between George Washington and who was our port-master at that time, and with the Governor Langdon, of him trying to capture her back, to take her back into enslavement. So there's that rich story. And across the state, there's just so much more stories. There's the story of Nancy Prince in Henniker, she was enslaved first, and she was in Massachusetts before she came to Henniker. But then she ends up, she and her husband goes to Russia, and they worked for the Tsars. Then she goes to Jamaica and worked for the emancipation there, and then she comes back to the state. Another rich story.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, in those days, when you talk about traveling in those days, a long time ago, they took boats. There were no planes. And they would be on those boats for weeks before they got to their destination. So it really took a lot of initiative, and that's why I like to say that the people that crossed the Atlantic and came here are the bravest, because it's not for people that are hesitant or they're not brave enough to get on a boat, because you don't know, what's awaiting you at the other end. And to go to Russia and then, Jamaica and then back. It's just incredible.
Well, that's the thing, when you start looking at these histories, people got around, and you would think that they didn't,
That's right.
But even the story of the Underground Railroad, how did those self-emancipated enslaved people do it? In the woods. If you, I look at New Hampshire woods, you'd get lost in a minute, right?
It's just populated by trees. We have the most trees probably of any state that I know.
How do you get from point A to point B?
That's right.
And if you're traveling alone by yourself at night in the dark in these woods, you've got to be brave.
You've got to be brave.
You've got to be brave.
And they didn't have warm clothing. They used a lot of animal skin in those days to keep warm. It was a tough history. And I'm so interested in this field, because I think this is how we move forward as Americans. We got to come to terms with who we are and who built America, and we are all in it, all of us. And doing this project, it's not a project, it's actually, you've been around for 4 years now, so it is a foundation. I think it's the model that you use is something that has to be replicated. Native Americans and, Hispanics, Latin American folks that live here also have to bring in their culture to show how different the state is than what we see. You know, as you said, it's the whitest, perhaps Vermont and New Hampshire are the whitest states in the United States. But it's not the case, as you said. We've had, all of us, you know, I live here, you live here, and it's our home. We love it.
Absolutely.
We love New Hampshire. And
I'm from Jamaica.
That's
born
there
in
you go. We all
Jamaica.
came from somewhere, and Jamaica's beautiful. I've
been
never
here.
been there, but your
Roughly
parents?
maybe around 40 years.
Are you a first generation immigrant as well?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you came in.
I actually came before my parents did.
Oh, right.
So,
you
yeah,
were
I
the
was the
first
first of my family,
immigrant.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And I was listening to a show. I don't know if it was just this morning, where they were talking about how people from the Caribbean that were, you know, so important in African American culture. You know, somebody was talking about the different personalities that came from Jamaica into the United States to galvanize and to, you know, give some kind of excitement and reason for feeling proud, really. A lot of African Americans love that. You know, we love the fact that, you know, we have that connection with the island. So, and Jamaica has a rich history, and of course everybody knows Bob Marley, the singer. But it is a much richer history, and I am a very, very big fan of Bob Marley. And it's a very his music is just so universal.
Absolutely.
It appeals to people everywhere.
It's timeless.
It's timeless. It's always going to be. I asked my children. I said, when you listen to Bob Marley, do you think of an old singer and a boring sort of tune? And no, we love it. It's exciting, and so it is timeless. I agree with you. It's just amazing. I'm glad you're sharing a bit of your story, and I didn't go into why you're doing this, but what made you get motivated to join this project, and when did you think about it? And
so I think it was in 2002, one Black History Month, the end of February, that a reporter in Milford, New Hampshire, wrote an article about Milford's long-forgotten daughter, Harriet Wilson. And when I read that article, it was, wow, that was the first mention I'd ever seen of a person of color in my town, my hometown. Well, by then I had lived in Milford about 20 years, 25 years. And the article said, you know, the author of the article said that she interviewed the principal of the high school. Now this is a woman, Harriet Wilson, publishing the first novel in English in the world. And we didn't know about her in our, you know.
No,
if that had been a white woman,
we would have
her
known
name
about
would
her
be
right
on the
away.
school building, her name would be on the
absolutely.
library, the towns, the streets, you know. It would be, should be visible, and
It should
everybody
be
would
visible.
know.
Absolutely.
So, you know, in that article, they talked about why we didn't know. So the principal said that, well, you know, he didn't know, he hadn't heard of her before, the high school principal, and he would bring her book to the school. And the following week, a teacher from the school wrote an op-ed and said that the book was inappropriate for high school students.
Oh, wow.
And because it was such a treasure, it should only be studied at the college level.
Oh.
And that's when I was like, no.
Something is wrong.
Yeah, it was to me an effort to bury the book once again. And so I formed an organization, the Harriet Wilson Project, got a group of women together. There was a Black Professional Women's Heritage Group out in Nashua, so I pulled them in, and we formed the organization, raised awareness for Wilson, got a statue built for her in Milford.
Oh,
and that got me started.
Oh, that's
and then I
amazing.
Then I met Valerie Cunningham and saw the work she was doing in Portsmouth.
Right.
And I joined up with her. Well, she pulled me in. Can't say no to Valerie. And then when we were looking at all the research and the history Valerie had done, we decided, we had the work going on in Milford. She had the work in the Seacoast. There were other people doing the work, like in Warner. The Historical Society's Lynn was doing the work in Warner. So we said, there's so much here. This should be a statewide organization. And that's how the Black Heritage Trail was formed.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And how did you bring in, I see that the University of New Hampshire is quite involved in this project, right?
Yeah, I actually worked at the University of New Hampshire for a while. I did the director for community outreach and diversity programming. And when I was there, David Waters was a professor there as well. And we started the Black New England Conference to talk about this history, bring it to another level nationally. And we still do the Black New England Conference, 16 years. Next year will be the 16th year of doing the Black New England Conference.
That's incredible. So the conference happens at the University of New Hampshire?
Actually, we brought it to Manchester.
Manchester,
So our partner, I no longer work at the university, haven't for a while. And we brought to Southern New Hampshire University's our partner for the Black New England Conference now.
Oh, right.
And that's our, it's 3 years that we've partnered with them.
Is it happening in April or when?
No, so that's in October. So that's
okay. So you just had it.
Yeah, we just had it. That's in October.
I just missed that one.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, because of COVID, so we had one, it's usually an in-person where we bring scholars from all across the country to talk about a topic. I'm blanking what we did this year. Next year, just because we're always working a year ahead.
Absolutely.
Next year, we're looking at the title for the conference next year is where the money's at. We're looking at finance.
Finance, okay,
The history of
absolutely,
wealth and wealth building.
Right, and that's such an important topic, especially in the African American community, where so many people were denied loans to buy homes, and there's a big history of holding back people of African American ancestry in this country. So I think that this is a topic that is so important. Without financial empowerment, we cannot move ahead. We can't get an education. We can't get good health care. It is essential. So I'm so glad you're going to
access
bring
and denial of access to wealth is what we'll look at in 2022.
Exactly. Exactly. So you're going to. I'm so excited about that because I tend to talk about the financial aspect so much. I was saying to you earlier that I belong to a couple of boards, and for some reason, because I was asking about their finances, they were like, "You're going to be our treasurer." I said, "But I'm just telling you, you need the financial, foundation to do well." But it is. I have become convinced that it is so important. A few years ago, I also share a lot about me on the show. I work for UNESCO in Africa. I was the Knight International Journalism Fellow for the International Center for Journalists, and I went to work in Liberia. And so I worked in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Côte d'Ivoire, which are called the Mano River Union states, the 3 states. One is French-speaking, Sierra Leone and Liberia. Their official language is English. And I had a wonderful experience there working with journalists. I was training media houses, their main public TV stations and their newspapers and their radio stations on financial sustainability. And that happened because they created this fellowship to bring in a journalist that had some kind of a background working with corporations. And I had worked for some corporations, and the financial part was very important, and it's beginning to be seen as a way for any organization to sustain itself and not just close their doors. And in those countries where I worked, it was fundamental because of their very difficult experience with democracy. They had civil war, and some of them are they had to rebuild the nation, And so a lot of times you'd see radio stations and newspapers, so many of them just open up, and then they close down within a couple of years. And a lot of either listeners or readers would say, well, I no longer have my newspaper, or I can't listen to my radio. So my job was to embed myself in those organizations and work with their, not just with their financial person, but I also worked with the journalists on helping them, write stories that would resonate with the public, and also doing, digital advertising and so forth. So that was my stint, my little work in the financial area, where we were marrying journalism with financial sustainability.
Yeah.
But thank you for doing, for taking it in the right direction. I can see now that there were so many years preceding this big project. You worked, by step by step in stages, and then you got to this point where we now have this beautiful Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, which I encourage all of you who are listening, and those that are overseas, because I know the show is watched all over the world. Please go to their website, www.blackheritage.trail NH for New Hampshire.
Yes.
Black Heritage Trail NH.org, and do the virtual tour so that you can learn more about what this project represents. And the other part, I really like that we talked about financial inclusion, and we talked about people of African American ancestry seeing themselves as belonging. What experiences could you share with us that happens in the state where a lot of people like us, African Americans, have difficulty? What are the areas that need a lot of work on? What can we,
I don't think we're any different than any state in the country that has to deal with issues of race and racism. There are systems and structures that are set in place that disadvantage people of color. We can look at our medical, institution.
Yes.
Who has access,
to healthcare.
Access to healthcare.
And even when you have access to healthcare, I personally, I'm a cancer survivor. I, a couple of years ago, had to fight breast cancer. And I always say that I was astonished, because I was always told, well, African Americans, and you have trouble accessing healthcare because of poverty. You don't have a good health insurance because you don't get good jobs. That was not the case for me, because my husband and I had good jobs and excellent insurance. And for 15 years, a decade and a half, I had a lump that was a slow growth cancer that I was told was just, calcification. The doctors didn't bother to do a biopsy. And I almost died. And my sister died of breast cancer. My mom died of cancer. My brother died. So every time I go into a doctor's office, I say, I tell them the story. I say my mother, my sister, my brother died of cancer, so that they see me as high risk. And even with that, I did not get the best health care. I had to change doctors 3 times to get to a point where it was getting too big, and I was getting sick and going to the emergency room almost every other week, because they couldn't figure out. I mean, also, why is it that emergency rooms don't check, when they can't find anything? Why don't they see, do you have a lump? They don't ask if you have a lump. I was like, well, they couldn't save me. I had to save myself. So there's a lot of work to be done in the healthcare.
I don't think there's any systems that we have that are not affected. Look at our schools, access, it's not only an issue of race, but also wealth. Our school, especially in New Hampshire, the way our school system's set up. If you're in a wealthy town, you get the better education than if you're in a poor town.
The way the education system is financed by property taxes. And that affects which schools are better in terms of resources.
And people of color say the same thing. When they go into a store, they're followed. They got stopped by the police at
Oh,
a
we
higher
get
rate.
used to it. I don't
Yeah.
even think
Yeah,
about it anymore.
exactly.
I know that if I go to the dollar store or I
Yeah.
go to any of these stores, I'll have somebody right behind me,
Yeah.
or I go to
Yeah.
TJ Maxx, or
Yeah.
we're singled out
Yeah.
for being the ones that would
Yeah.
do something, or it is, and then driving while black, and all of that.
There's the issue of systems and there's the personal.
Right.
And so we're not any different.
Right. So it
racism
happens,
is a national
it's an
problem.
It's
not
it is.
just local.
I would call it a disease. I
It
think it's a
is.
disease
Yeah.
because you pass on the disease, and it kind of, you catch a disease sometimes.
Yeah.
So if you're raised by parents that are not focusing on the content of your character, but they're focusing on the pigmentation of one's skin, then you're going to raise kids that do the same thing, and you're replicating this hatred in your heart for centuries. And it's time to bring that to an end.
Yeah.
And I think that being brave and talking to our neighbors and bringing them into your lives and vice versa, it is a job, and I'm so proud of you for what you do, because this is exactly the type of thing that I just think we do, to let people see that we want the better world.
Yeah.
My first guest talked about, making the world a better place, because one of the reasons why I invited the anthropologist was that he always signs off saying, make the world a better place. So how do you make the world a better place? It's by being active and not just accepting the situation as it is. And I think in your case and your team and the people that are around you, you're doing a fabulous job. It's just really significant, and it will have an impact for generations to come. But I also hope that this history will help to make everybody in New Hampshire much better than they are.
Oh, absolutely. I think you can't hold on to your stereotypical ideas of who you think a person of color is once you know these people's stories, once you see their journey, once you realize what they've gone through, or even just the ordinariness of being.
Right.
Once you know these, you can't hold on to.
Right.
Once we know that we had a slave port in Portsmouth, we can't say that there was no slavery in New Hampshire. We have the burying ground. Once we have that visible site of where we erased, the graves of Black folks in New Hampshire. You can't say that there wasn't that it wasn't done. Mm-hmm. So we have to face our history honestly and bravely, as you said. But in doing that, stereotypes have to fall away unless you're really wedded to it and you don't want to move forward.
Right. And it is, I often say, a couple of years ago when I ran for office, I ran into trouble with some opponents, and I felt like my life was at risk, and I wanted to back off and say, well, I want to run for office, but I don't want to get killed. It's not worth getting killed just because people don't want you to represent a certain idea that they don't believe in. And so this brings me to the point of ignorance. It's all about ignorance. That's why I appreciate your project so much, because you are educating the young, you're educating adults, and there is nothing in the world that can replace education.
No.
And more often you'll find that the prejudice or the discrimination and this systemic racism that exists in this country is due to a few people at the top that benefit financially, trying to alienate the people at the bottom who don't have an education by using buzzwords, that, taxes or abortion, or, to bring them on board, when in fact what you're trying to do is to make people have more resources, better education, and they don't think about that. And that's
the whole idea of separation by race, right, started when we brought a group of people here to work for free, right, to build this nation for free. But we also brought poor white folks here. And so the poor people, the poor black folks and the poor white folks were getting together, right?
Yes.
And they were outnumbering the owning class.
That's right.
And so they had to create a wedge between these groups, because then, you know,
would be
there'd be an
divided.
uprising.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So how could we, the easiest way to create this wedge was then to take the poor white folks, make them overseers, and make the color of your skin a divider and not equal, so you can keep the two groups fighting each other.
Right.
Keep the structure.
Right.
And then you don't have to
When
worry.
you have so
you don't
much
have
in
to worry
common.
about the wealthy, because they
They're
want you to
protected.
keep
They
fighting.
want you to keep
Yeah.
fighting, and they want you to keep voting for them.
Yes.
So that they can be in power. It's all about power, I think.
Yeah.
And that's why you know, I'm going back to, you know, what matters most. You know, I said to you I was going to ask you what matters most. I didn't disclose much about your bio and history, because what you have to share is so rich and so important. But you are an amazing woman yourself, and you've seen the world, and you're doing something to make the world a better place. And what matters most to you?
So, of course, there's a lot of things that matter, but I think being your authentic self and bringing your authentic self to a place matters most. And what I mean by authentic self is who you are, right? What your passions are, knowing what that is, knowing what you stand for, and being congruent with what that is.
Be truthful.
Be truthful to
yourself.
yourself.
To yourself, and to what you want.
And what you want.
And I said before, and I always repeat on the show, it's about family, it's about community, it's about you know, education, healthcare.
Yeah.
We want to be healthy, we want to be educated, we want a united community, we want the community to be united. So that's what the theme of the show is. And you know, it's we didn't mention, but it is the holiday season, and I, you know, decorated the table a little bit, and and you got a bit of water to celebrate the holidays. Well, cheers! Happy holidays
Happy
to
holidays.
you.
Thank you.
It's Christmas is just a couple of weeks away, and I'm so glad you came here on the most important holiday of the year, I think, for all of us. And I want you back because we touched upon certain things, but for example, around Martin Luther King Day, if you can come back, and you know, you can bring another member of your board if you like, somebody you would like to bring.
Absolutely.
It would be so important for us to have that represented, because we did not talk a lot about these personalities, these figures that have been historic figures in the state, and I mean in the United States and in America. But I think the more we speak about these things, the better. And my idea about that is that, you know, I'll bring you back a few times. We want to talk about the African American inventors, for example. Okay. You know, a lot of times, you know, when I talk to my kids, you know, or some of my friends, I say, but I didn't know that, you know, the elevator or part of the elevator was invented by an African American man, or that the children's pushchair, or you know, was invented by an African American, or there are just so many inventions. And I, you know, when we watched that movie Hidden Figures, then we found out that there were these amazing African American women that were mathematicians that were helping the spacecraft take off. These are the stories that we want to bring here to what matters most, because the more we learned about the value of the people that may not look like us, and you know, the pigmentation of one's skin or the accent. I have an accent because I'm a first-generation immigrant. I came from, I was born in West Africa, in Guinea-Bissau, under Portuguese colonialism, and I ended up moving to the UK. I lived in England for many, many years. My husband is actually from there, and you know, we moved here a long time ago. So I come from a very multiracial, multicultural sort of background. And I want to bring that to the show because I feel like the more people in Londonderry and in New Hampshire and in the United States and other parts of the world that are watching this, the more they learn about history and about, as you said, learning about who we are, find out who you are, and represent yourself well, the better. I think
our world just gets richer.
It gets richer.
Yeah.
It isn't it? Isn't it the case that we get stronger? I remember belonging to a book club when I lived in Austin, Texas. You know, I always tend to be in either I don't choose to be in neighborhoods where people vote differently than me, the majority, but I always end up in a red neighborhood or state. But I always make a point of making friends with everybody because, as I said before, I love everybody and I expect other people to treat me the way they would like to be treated, and we should treat others the way we'd like to be treated. And that's the theme for the holidays. And I just hope that, you know, you have a fantastic holiday and that you come back again. And I wish our, you know, audience also happy holidays. Make sure you enjoy your family and your neighbors and be, you know, be the person, be an authentic person every day and live your best life that way. You can never achieve happiness if you're pretending to be somebody else or if you're letting somebody tell you how you should, what you should believe and what you should do. So with that,
there's one image that when you were talking about diversity and how rich it is that came to mind is the field of daffodils in the Netherlands, right?
Oh, right.
If there was just one color that went on for miles, color,
right?
How boring.
How boring.
But when you have all the colors, it's so vibrant, so rich, so
it is
yummy.
vibrancy. It is the best. It is the best, and I think everybody knows that. And I had on my first show, I had Richard Loban, Dr. Richard Loban, who has written many books, and he's an Africanist, and he was the head of the African American history program at the Rhode Island College, and he was talking about how people don't really know the history, and I'm so glad now people can do their DNA profile and find out that they have so many different peoples that are part of their ancestry. So I think with that we're going to have a better place. And I watch some programs a lot of times where I see people saying, "Oh my gosh, I did my DNA profile. There was a KKK person that did a DNA profile. Found out, oh my gosh, I have some people of color that are part of my ancestry. I'm out." So you know, do your DNA profile and find out who you are. And also embrace the world and embrace unity and progress. And until next time, this is our last show of 2021. JerriAnne Boggis was here with us, and she's here with us. She will be back. Because we have so many conversations to have about the subject matter that she's been involved with for so long. Thank you very much for watching one more edition, one more episode of What Matters Most. Thank you to our producers and editor, Erin Berry, and Helen is our producer. She's behind there looking after the show. Thank you so much to both, and happy holidays. Thank you for being with us.